and public function of education, right? Now, Regional Engineering College has been established under Societies Registration Act. It's a non-statutory body, okay? Autonomous non-statutory body. However, it is registered, and moreover, center and state are providing the money over here. Provide funding. Clear? State can supervise administration. This is another part. And moreover, there is the public function of education. When you see all these points, what do you think? Should this be state or not? Should this be state? You're correct. It should be state, right? Any responses from online students? Should this be state?
Yes, sir.
Very good. The reason being that the resources are being provided by the government, right? You can just write this down here. Resources, okay? Now, also, state can supervise the administration. This means, first of all, resources means finance. This part means administration. Yes, there is a fourth point also. Public function of education. Apart from that, officers of government are members of society. Okay? State can supervise administration and officers are members of society. Finance is controlled by state. Administration is controlled by state. Public function of education. The function also happens to be that of a state. This was thus held to be state. Okay? Now, but the thing is, this is the case in which more conclusively a test was laid down. Okay? Has everyone written all of this down? There are 5 points. All of these points?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You've written this down? Okay. Because in this case, a test was laid down and I'm going to write down the points of that test. And you'll notice it is so logical in nature that all the rest of the cases have been informed by this particular judgment. Okay. So, your first point, you can write down Ajay Hasya versus Khalid Mujib. Test laid down. What are the points here? Number 1, is the entire share capital owned by government? This is the first question that you have to answer. Second question, is the finance provided sufficient to cover all expenses? Basically what I'm trying to say is, if the government is providing the money, then is it sufficient to cover all the expenses of that organization, right? Thirdly, is the body protected by monopoly status conferred by government. Are you clear with these first 3 points? There are 2 more. Is the entire share capital owned by the government? So, why is this significant?
The government will be on the main administrative.
Precisely, the moment you are owning the entire share capital of a particular institution, that means that you have control over it. Not only over the resources, but also the administration. Okay, because you are the one who gives the money and you are the one who decides how that money is going to be spent. Is the finance provided sufficient to cover all expenses? Why is answering this question important? For the very same reason. If the resources are coming in, who is the one who is providing all of them? If the government is in fact providing and satisfying all the expenses, regardless of whether it has share capital or not, it might have enough control. Yes. Third point, is the body protected by monopoly status conferred by government? Is there any law that the government has passed that is saying that this body is the only body that can operate? That will also show that the government is trying to say that this is the only body that will be allowed to discharge the function that we are trying to say over here. Clear? Fourth point. Straightaway. Is there, and mark this point because this very specific phrase is the crux of this entire chapter. Is there deep and pervasive control by government? Is there deep and pervasive control by the government? Again, why is answering this question important? Just like in the facts of that case, the center and the state more specifically can supervise the administration of the regional engineering college, right? Officers of the state and the central government are also members of the society, which indicates there is deep and pervasive control by the government. Clear? Fifth point. Last point. Does it discharge a public function? Okay? Why is this important again? For the very same reason that if over here there is a body that is discharging a public function, that means it is discharging a function for the government. And if it is discharging something for the government, then you could say that in the sense of vicarious liability, the government is supposed to be liable. Or at least this body should be termed to be state so that the body can be held to be liable. Clear? Are all these 5 points visible? Are all these visible or something is not? Only 2 points are visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just wait for a moment. Is it visible now?
Yes, the 4 points are visible. The last point is not visible.
Okay. I'll just tell the last point to you. The last point is, does it discharge a public function? Does it discharge a public function? Any questions?
Sir, in point number 3 is written, is the body protected by a monopoly statute?
Monopoly status conferred by government. Yes. Is there deep and pervasive control? Deep and pervasive control by the government.
Non-statutory body was recognized.
Yes, completely non-statutory body. It was registered under Societies Registration Act. Okay, can we proceed further?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's go ahead. This case is very famous, and in law school I'm sure you would have heard of it at some point. Although the end result of the case was very disappointing, but we'll try and understand why. This case is related to BCCI. Please note down Z Telefilms versus Union of India. In this case, the test as laid down in Ajay Hasya versus Khalid Mujib was applied. However, the BCCI was not found to satisfy the elements of that test and hence was not coming under the purview of state. Z Telefilms versus Union of India. Is BCCI state? BCCI decides team members, pays salary, organizes matches, and there are other sport related functions. However, BCCI does not receive government funds, government does not own share capital, members are independently appointed no deep and pervasive control. Okay, so this is the situation, you're the judge, okay? Is the Board of Control for Cricket in India state? It's not. Why? Although it is the one who decides the team members, pays salary, organizes matches and other sport related functions, which shows that it entirely controls cricket. Is this monopoly conferred by the state?
Yes.
No. The state has nowhere said that BCCI can be the only body that does this. Okay? Just write it down. I have not mentioned that point. BCCI is not protected by state monopoly. I hope all these points are visible.
Yes, sir.
So, although BCCI is the only organization, its monopoly is not state protected, number one. Number two, it does not receive government funds. The government does not give it money to do anything. Government does not own the share capital. Members are independently appointed. Government is not nominating any of the members. No deep and pervasive control. Okay? Now, if you have noticed over here, I have covered the four main points that are given in the last test. In Ajay Hasya versus Khalid Mujib, the first thing was, is the share capital owned?
Yes, sir.
Second was, are the funds enough? Third was, protected by monopoly. Fourth was, deep and, very good, deep and pervasive control, right? But if you notice, the fifth point I have not mentioned over here, is it discharging a public function, right? Over here, in a sense, it is discharging a public function. But do you realize that nowhere is it mentioned that if only one of the points is satisfied, then it will be a state. Okay? So you can just note this thing down. I think this is Federal Bank of India versus Sagar Thomas. Let me just check for a moment. Yeah, Federal Bank Limited versus Sagar Thomas. An observation was made. Federal Bank versus Sagar Thomas. In this case, the reasoning was, if it is not enough to say that if one of the conditions is satisfied, the body will be a state. The determination of the body as a state varies on a case-to-case basis. Okay? Varies on a case-to-case basis. Any confusions in the concept till now? Any confusions?
No, sir.
If you have any doubt at any of the earlier cases, are you being able to understand how we have traveled from the first case to this? In the first case, Rajasthan State Electricity Board versus Mohanlal. You can note that down. I don't think you've noted that down. Rajasthan State Electricity Board versus Mohanlal. The Electricity Board was a statutory body established under Electricity Supply Act. It was held to be the state because Under Article 298, government can carry out commercial functions. The next case was very similar again, Sukhdev versus Bhagat Ram. Statutory body is established under the statute, discharging a function of the government. It satisfies the definition of state. The third case was R.D. Shetty versus International Airport Authority. Instrumentality test was evolved over there. In the fourth case, this instrumentality test was applied, but it was not satisfied by CSIR. Why? Because CSIR was not a statutory body, it was a non-statutory autonomous body. In the fifth case, Som Prakash Rekhi versus Union of India, semi-statutory and semi-non-statutory, held to be state. In the sixth case, Ajay Hasya versus Khalid Mujib, 5 points have been laid down, which clearly state that whether it is a statutory body or not does not matter. It is these 5 points that matter. This test was applied in Z Telefilms versus Union of India, in which it was concluded BCCI is not state, because it's even though over here it satisfies the last point, it discharges a public function, the rest of the 4 points it does not satisfy. This particular thing was clearly mentioned in Federal Bank versus Sagar Thomas, where it was stated that it varies on a case-to-case basis. It does not matter if only 1 point is satisfied. Is everyone clear?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's proceed further. Over here we have one last important case, the one that you could say is now the stare decisis on this point. This case is Pradeep Kumar Biswas versus Indian Institute of Chemical Biology. This case was 14 years after Subhajit Tiwari. 14 years after Subhajit Tiwari. Okay? In which this case was reconsidered by a constitution bench. Who can tell me what do you mean by a constitution bench? We have mostly covered a lot of in-depth concepts, but this, just from prelim standpoint, what is a constitution bench? Any answers?
So when the bench comprises of 5 or more judges.
Very good. When the bench comprises of 5 or more judges, it is known as a constitution bench. Primarily 5 judges. Is there a mention of constitution bench in any of the articles of the constitution? Does any of the articles, does it anywhere refer specifically to this term or this concept? Please just take note of this. Article 145. Read it carefully and you will find it. If you know that there is something known as advisory jurisdiction of Supreme Court, right? Or there are cases that deal with violation of fundamental rights and very important cases. So in Article 145, it is clearly mentioned that all cases relating to advisory jurisdiction and any of these important, I think, cases relating to declaration of laws as unconstitutional have to be presided over by a constitution bench. Okay, so logically, if you notice over here, this case came after 14 years of Sabhajit Tiwari, right? Now, when a particular point of law or when a particular legal position has been standing for 14 years, lot of rights and liabilities and obligations and so on have been dealt with under that law, isn't it? Now we are faced with a situation where it has to be changed, right? And because it is such a situation, it was referred to the Constitution bench. Clear? Now, if you remember what had happened in Sabhajit Tiwari, a junior stenographer was demanding equal remuneration with newly appointed stenographers. Okay? In the same way, Pradeep Kumar Biswas versus IICB, this body that we are dealing with over here, IICB is a part of CSIR. Now do you understand why this case was filed? This body, Indian Institute of Chemical Biology, happens to be under CSIR. Okay? So logically this means that this individual over here, Pradeep Kumar Biswas, who was filing an Article 14 case for termination of service, for him to be able to vindicate this particular right, for him to be able to enforce this right, he has to prove IICB is state, right? But as long as Sabhajit Tiwari versus Union of India exists, it shows that it is not state. Why? Because the body that owns it is not state according to this earlier decision. That is why this reconsideration happened. Okay? And in this case, very simple 2 points were laid down. Is the body financially functionally and administratively controlled by government? Second question, is the control deep and pervasive or regulatory in nature? Is the body financially, functionally and administratively controlled by the government? If you notice over here, the three elements of this test are very similar to 3 points of Ajay Hase and Khalid Muji, right? All that it is doing is that it is generalizing it a little bit further. It is not using terms such as ownership of share capital or provision of full expenses and all of that, supervising of administration. No. All it is saying is the body financially, functionally and administratively controlled by the government? Okay? And whether this control over here is deep and pervasive, if it is deep and pervasive, it is state, or whether it is regulatory in nature. Okay? Now, I want to quickly relate this particular principle that you're seeing over here with Z telefilms. In Z telefilms, first of all, the first test, is the body financially, functionally and administratively controlled by government? Is BCCI controlled by government in this way? No? Yes. Any responses? Very good. It's not controlled. Okay. Now, is the control that if at all any control the government has on BCCI, is it deep and pervasive? No, not at all. Why? Because these three things don't exist to begin with. Is it regulatory in nature? Yes, to a certain extent. How? Because the government decides which teams will enter into the country to play. The banning of Pakistan was not something that was done by BCCI at the end of the day, right? It was something that was done by the government. So that is something that is a regulatory action. It is not a deep and pervasive control. Clear? But in this case, it was held that this body called IICB, which is a part of CSIR, which if you remember, I had mentioned earlier, it is a non-statutory body, right? But although it is non-statutory, very good, it is funded fully by government. Okay? And officers are appointed by government. So I think we've just covered 8 cases, right? There are a few more cases, although it's not, how should I say, if you're writing an answer, it's not important. These are the 8 cases that have to be there. The other 2 cases that are there apart from, okay, is everyone clear with these cases? Have you written this down?
Yes, what is the conclusion of this case?
That IICB is state. Why? Because the father body, CSIR, is non-statutory, but it is funded fully by the government. Officers are appointed by the government also. So, the body is financially, functionally and administratively controlled by the government, and that control is deep and pervasive. Clear? Have you all written all these points down?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's just add a few more things and then we'll be done. Okay. The last 2 cases, these are extra cases just for you to understand the concept from a point of depth. This one is B.S. Minhas versus Indian Statistical Institute. Okay. The ISI over here is a, just let me check for a moment, I think it's a, yes. Yes, it's a registered society. ISI is a registered society. Central government appoints the members. Funds are provided by central government and existence of deep and pervasive control. Very straightforward case, nothing too confusing, right? We are only simply applying the same test that we have learned. If you have noticed, in the last 4 cases, we are fundamentally using the same language. The only thing that is changing is the body. Otherwise, everything is the same. So, is the Indian Statistical Institute state? It is a registered society that we know. It's a non-statutory registered society. Is that enough for us to answer? No. We need to know a few more things. Central government appoints the members. This proves administrative control. Funds are provided by central government. This is financial control. And deep and pervasive control exists because, first of all, it's a body that acts for the government. The Statistical Institute is mostly involved with a lot of your, for example, your sample survey organization that is there right next to this particular office. They work in collaboration with the ISI. And the ISI also lays down a lot of standards sometimes for scientific instruments and all of that. So all of those things happen to be governmental functions. So the ISI is functionally, financially and administratively controlled by the government. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, I'll ask you a question. Is NCERT state? What do you think? You'd be surprised to know NCERT is not state. Okay? This was laid down in, I'll just write this down here. We won't go into much of the reasoning. Chandra Mohan Jain versus I think it's NCERT. Yes, Chandra Mohan Jain versus NCERT. Not state. Why? Because I'm not going to write the points down, you guys will write it down. It's very simple. Why is it not state? It is a registered society again, but central government does not appoint the members. Funds are not provided by central government and therefore there is no deep and pervasive control. Clear? Everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any doubts till now? Alright, so this completes your concept of state, but I want you to write down a small statement by Justice Bhagwati. This will help you understand the concept better. And the reason I'm giving you this particular passage is to save you the pain of unnecessarily going through a book and reading through multiple paragraphs. Okay. You can write this down. This is Justice Bhagwati's opinion in Ajay Hasya versus Khalid Mujib. A modern government functions under the impulse a modern government functions under the impulse of the philosophy of a welfare state. Okay? It undertakes a multitude of socio-economic functions. To use the corporate methodology, is not to liberate the government from its basic obligations to respect fundamental rights. There's a little bit more in this, but this is enough for you. A modern state functions under the impulse of the philosophy of a welfare state. Okay? Like I've told you, what do we mean by a welfare state? The state that is working for the welfare of the people, that constitute it. Okay? Such a welfare state carries out a multitude of socio-economic functions. Multitude simply means various socio-economic functions. Okay? To use the corporate methodology, by corporate methodology, over here we simply mean when the government is acting through the instrumentality of state. Okay? Instrumentality of state. Could be company, society, so on. To use the corporate methodology, that is to form a company, will not liberate the government, will not free the government from its basic obligations, its basic duty to respect fundamental rights. Clear? Now why is this given over here? And you can write this down. This is a statement of, instead of writing Justice Bhagwati, the proper way to write it is Bhagwati J. Okay? Ajay Hasya versus Khalid Mujib. These are his words specifically. Because the moment you decide that you allow the government to do this, right, it will form a company tomorrow to discharge any public function. And because it will form a company, it will say that, okay, we are not state, you cannot enforce fundamental rights against this body. And by that way, what will be affected? Fundamental rights. Like I've said in the beginning of the class, arbitrary application of power against individuals by centers of power has to be avoided. Clear? Is everyone clear with this?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, so this is essentially the foundation of fundamental rights jurisprudence in India. In the next class, we'll be dealing with Article 13. In Article 13, we'll be talking about two main doctrines, doctrine of eclipse and doctrine of severability. Okay, so I expect you guys to just have a basic understanding of it before you come to class. You don't have to know in detail at all. There'll probably be 6-7 cases under that we'll be talking about, and at this point, don't worry that we are going a little slow, because it's important to cover these concepts in a little detail. Fundamental rights should take you about 6 to 7 classes to finish, because whether you go for your mains exam or your prelims exam, this is the most important part. In the mains exam, it so happens that 3 out of 6 questions in constitutional law comes from fundamental rights, the majority of it. Okay, as far as the vastness of the subject is concerned, like I told in the first class, no one is going to ask you questions on mains questions, especially on constitution of high courts or your municipalities, panchayati raj and all of that. No questions will be asked. You can definitely expect no question to be asked from Article 365 to 307. You'll never get a single question from that area. Okay? Alright, so just a small quick revision then of the the concepts that we have done from the last class and this class. I'll be asking you short questions and I expect quick answers, okay? And these are things that we have discussed in the last class specifically. Okay, which part of the Constitution deals with elections?
5.
Not part 5. You got one of the digits correct. That's a clue.
Part 15.
Part 15, yes, very good. It's part 15, okay? Okay. Which part the directive principles are mentioned in? 4. And fundamental duties are in? 4A. Perfect. All right. Right to education was introduced in which constitutional amendment? This is not, I have not told you this in the last class, but this is a prelims question.
86th Amendment.
Very good, 86th Amendment, okay? So by the 86th Amendment, you can just quickly note this down. By the 86th Amendment, your Article 21A was introduced. And can you tell me, there was a specific directive principle also which was amended by this particular amendment? It's Article 45. Okay, all right. Which country has inspired the concept of fundamental duties? Or which country has, which country's constitution led the framers?
American Constitution.
Fundamental duties? No. Fundamental rights? Yes.
Irish Constitution.
Can you repeat that, please?
Irish Constitution, sir.
Russian constitution is correct.
So USA, sir.
USA, the fundamental rights were inspired from USA, but fundamental duties from the Russian constitution, okay? And okay, one of you said Irish constitution. Irish constitution also inspired something. What was it? Very good. DPSP, directive principles. Okay. What about the emergency provisions? Germany. Japan inspired the incorporation of procedure established by law. Okay. Okay, you can just write 2-3 more things down. Secularism was recognized as basic feature of the constitution in remember, this discussion has nothing to do with state. I am just giving you extra points for prelims, nothing else. Okay, if you all of you have written this down?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so secularism was recognized in S.R. Bommai versus, I think it's state of Karnataka, or it could be Union of India, I'm not sure. Essentially, wherever you say S.R. Bommai, know that it's secularism.
The Union of India.
I think it could be Union of India, I'm not sure. It was a case against the state of Karnataka. It's the Union of India, yes. Can you tell me in which case democracy was recognized? In which case was democracy recognized as a basic feature? Which of the cases in the period between 1970 to 1980, there was one case, okay, in which the election of a particular prime minister was the subject? Which case was this? It is this case in which this was recognized.
Indira Gandhi versus Raj.
Very good. Indira Gandhi versus Raj Narayan. Equality was also recognized in M. Nagaraj versus Union of India. This case has to do with equality of opportunity in terms of public employment. M. Nagaraj versus Union of India. Okay. In which article do we find a reference to the concept of annual budget?
So 112.
112, very good. Annual financial statement. Please remember that in mains you will never be asked a question from that particular section of bills. 108 to 123 ordinance, they are not going to ask you any question in the mains exam, but only from the prelims point of view. Okay. What does the 10th schedule talk about?
Sir, anti-defection law.
Anti-defection law. Please mention that. 10th schedule talks about anti-defection, and make it a rule to just, you don't have to know the contents of any of these schedules. It'll take you a maximum of 5 to 10 minutes to make a list. Make a list of schedule 1 to schedule 12. You can be certain once in at least 2 years there is at least one prelims question from that. Never you'll get a mains question, but you'll get a prelims question. Okay, which article establishes the Language Commission? Very good, 344. Article 344 establishes the Language Commission. Just remember these as GK facts. I know it's a little annoying, but it's necessary. Okay, all right. So I will be giving you facts like this anytime we have 10 or 15 minutes left after the concept is over. So are you clear with everything that we have discussed today?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
All right. The next class I expect you to just do a very basic reading of Article 13. If possible, please note this case down and just read the basic facts about it, not the whole thing. I want you to read about Behram versus State of Bombay. You don't have to, this is optional reading. Behram versus State of Bombay. Yeah.
Can we take a short session on answer writing whenever we have time after the class?
Sure. Let us schedule it on, I think we can do it tomorrow itself. And if not tomorrow, then the next week on Tuesday itself we'll do it. Okay? Okay, how many of you are definitely going to be taking Constitution and Jurisprudence as your optional? You're taking. All right, so we very good, perfect. See, it's a, not taking jurisprudence and constitution is a missed opportunity. The only reason why people fail to score in that is because of the language. That is all. In all the other topics, you will notice that it's very conceptual or problem-based questions you are dealing with. In this, once you know the language of one particular concept, it can be applied in repeated cases. If you notice, we were discussing Article 12. All you have to do once you go through the notes, arbitrary application of power by centers of power against individual. That is one sentence you have to remember. Then the next sentence is public cooperation is creation of state, and hence limitations will apply to it. And the other concepts that you have to remember is that hierarchy chart that I gave you at the start. Government can either be your departmental bodies or your autonomous bodies. Autonomous bodies can be statutory or non-statutory. It's very logical, and please remember that the only reason why people don't get marks in Constitution and Jurisprudence is because they don't write the answers properly. Hence, the request that you made regarding answer writing is very relevant at this point. The reason why they don't get marks, which I have noticed also, is because no one gives headings in the questions. Okay? Just since we have a little bit of time, let me just quickly tell you how you should approach one particular mains question, if at all. Let us say, and remember, when you